Welcome back to another episode of Tim's Garage. Now that I've got the car finally running correctly, it's time to work on some of the cosmetic issues. And on day one of ownership, with just 6,500 miles on this car last year, I managed to find a rather large speed bump in Las Vegas, Nevada on the road trip home on the very first day. And what happened is the car, I wound up crunching the bottom of the fender. And you can see that I've traced out all the cracks that are in this fender as I'm going to go through and start to repair it. This piece had been broken out, and I've already started the process of repairing this fender, but I thought perhaps it might be a good idea to explain to everybody how you go about repairing the sheet molded compound. And part of the repair process for me is, since I've done this my whole life, it's pretty straightforward to me, but trying to explain to everybody how we're going to do this. The initial part of the process is to use what I used was a die grinding tool, and you can see the little rounded bit on the end of this. And I'm not certain, how many people have seen die grinding bits like that, but I did take and V out on the back. You can see that it's been V'd out pretty heavily. You can see how I've ground it all out, and I've started to put some of the adhesive in to get some shape back to the fender. So in doing this and putting these pieces back together, I've had to do it in stages. Because it was so broken underneath, I've managed to tack it, and I used some sheet metal vice grips like this. I taped them so the adhesive wouldn't stay, and I was able to clamp the items and then glue it from the back side while it was clamped, and it hardened in the correct shape. So I'm getting the shape back into the fender. Now, for me, the reason I want to go ahead and repair this fender rather than just replace it with a new one is because of the color. This fender, given the color of the fender, is a very difficult color to match without having to blend into the balance of the vehicle. So what I've decided to do is I'm just going to repair the bottom, and I'm going to transition the color in this area right here so I won't get any color where it's going to match up against the balance of the car. So I'll blend in the color here, clear coat the whole panel, and you won't be able to tell any difference in the color. So I'll come back to this when I've got a little bit more of the repairing done underneath. You can see that it's broken here. It's still broken, and I need to glue it on the back side and get that shape done properly. You can see here it's still broken. So for those that want to try and save their fenders, these things are becoming harder and harder to get. So I'll go through the process of repairing it and give you guys instructions as I move through it. Thank you. Okay, here we are. We've got the inside of the fender all trimmed out, and I've done a little bit of clamping and gluing already to try and get the shape back. I've managed to reattach a chunk that was missing here, and I've managed to repair all of the cracking that's occurred down there. I've reattached a piece that's located right here, and I've used a little bit of this web mesh to correct it. Now I've gone and bought some new mesh from Lord Fuser, and it's number 700. This stuff is called Fuser 700 reinforcing mesh. This 700 mesh looks a lot different. You can see it's more of a very fine mesh, and I've cut out a number of pieces of it as a way of having a bunch of pieces cut out. I've got some longer strips here and some smaller strips, and I'm going to put some of the adhesive back in here, and you can see I've made a dam right here to be able to build up this area with some mesh in there, and I've got a second piece of mesh right here that I'm going to put down on top of it. I talked with a friend of mine, a fellow named Kai, and he indicated that the Fuser stuff is really good, and I used the Fuser adhesive, and it's their ridiculously fast Fuser plastic repair adhesive 142. The problem is it's only got about 60 seconds worth of working time. So I went through a stack of these little tips in trying to get the material used, and if you pause for even 15 or 20 seconds, it hardens up. So I've moved on. I'm going to use something that's got a little bit more working time. That's this 3M 8219. I'm going to use that adhesive, and I'm going to use that with a little bit of this mesh and squirt it into all of the areas here. Now, it's very difficult for me to be able to video this and do it, so I'll have to show photos as I move along. But just to give you guys an idea how easy it is to actually repair these fenders, I'm going to do the inside first, and I'll get the inside all done, and then I'll repair the outside by grinding into the inside repair a little bit, and repair it finally on the outside of the fender, but I'm starting with the inside first. And you can see I've opened it all up, got a little bit of the pre-shaping done, and I'll be doing the final shaping once I get the this area right in here all rebuilt again and filled up and made to work. So anyways, I'll be back at you with more video in a moment. Okay, now that I've managed to spread this all out pretty smooth, it looks a little sloppy, but you can see that the little form that I made is filled up with adhesive. I did have to prop the fender up on a bit of an angle to keep it from running out. It takes a little while for the longer setting adhesive to be able to hold its shape. So I've pressed the webbing into all the cracks. I've put adhesive on it, and now I just need to let this dry. It says it's a 30-minute cure, but I'll let this dry overnight, and I'll come back to it in the morning and see if I can shape it up, and I'll show you what it looks like in the morning. But for now, that's kind of where I'm at. A little bit of a mess. I had to clean out take the tip off. This is going to be junk by tomorrow, and I'll clean off my putty knife that I used tomorrow, and I'll cut out a little bit more of the webbing to use for additional filling tomorrow. But as it stands right now, I've pretty much got the inside of the fender completely repaired. I've got a little section down here that still needs to be done. I need to fill that a little bit better, and I will take care of that tomorrow as well. But for now, I've got the front section of the fender set. Okay, so I managed to get the inside of the fender all done. I've got it reinforced, as you can see here. I've got it all set up and done. And now I've started to V out all of the exterior cracks that I've got. So I've started to V these out, and I still have yet to do the ones on the front. And then I'll wind up using the Lord extreme plastic repair adhesive to repair the back cracks. I'm going to put a little bit more mesh in here just to make sure that I've reinforced that. But the 3M adhesive seems to stay just a little bit more flexible than I'd like, so I'm removing a lot of it and going with the rigid Lord adhesive, but I'll show those products later. Anyways, this is status where I'm at right now. Okay, so as I went through repairing the fender, I wound up kind of speeding through that, and let me explain the process, and I'll show some images in the video of how this process worked. So the first thing I did is I had shown how I V'd out all the grooves on the inside. I wound up filling the inside using a little bit of mesh, and this mesh is this mesh right here. It's this Fuser 700 mesh, bumper reinforcing mesh, and I use this to be able to reinforce the adhesive in the cracks to allow it to have a lot more strength rather than just having the adhesive itself that's going to be breaking it. And I'll show some examples of that being filled. Took several attempts to do that. I applied the adhesive on the inside of the fender first, and then wound up going on the outside. And the adhesive that I used is this Lord Fuser 142 fast adhesive with these one-time use tips that mount on here, and they mix these tips. The Fuser 142 is ridiculously fast. In fact, it hardened so fast that I wound up going through a number of these tubes, and I would encourage you to consider using the 152, which gives you a little bit more working time. I had to work extremely fast to be able to use this, and the advantage of that is you've got a 10-minute cure. Actually, I think it's a 90-second working time, a 20-minute cure to sand, and a 30-minute cure to be able to paint over it. So it's super fast with this 142, and the 152 slows that down a bit, which gives you a lot more working time, which would make it easier. So I did that, and I managed to get through all of the repairing both on the inside and the repairing on the outside of the panel. Okay, once I got all the repairs done and all the work sanding and blocking done with the adhesive that I used as filler and as a repair material, then I wound up using a product called Auto Surfacer UV. And this Auto Surfacer UV is pretty nice because it stays good in the can, but it is a true catalyzing product once sunlight hits it. So you're supposed to use a UV lamp, but I don't have a UV lamp, so I used the sunshine. I live in Southern California. It was really nice and bright. And I wound up repairing the panel, and once I had the panel all done, you can see the panel now is well repaired. I left it a little rougher on the inside. I'm not too worried about what the inside looks like, but I've got the outside all done, and this panel is now ready for me to be able to assemble back on the car once I get it refinished. So I'm just going to sand this down, and as you can see, I've kept the repair area pretty small. I'll finish it with a little bit of 600 wet, and after we match the color, we'll shoot the color with a camera and make sure we get a good formula for the tarnished silver that this panel is. And then we're going to blend the color down in this area here, probably protect it off on this edge right here so that none of this area gets color up against the door, and I have very little color difference between here along the door and here along the hood. So the car should look like it's had no work done to it, and that's kind of the goal that I'm looking for. But as you can see, the repair of the fender is complete. It's nice and strong. It's not going to break unless I hit another speed bump, but I'll get a picture of it back once the car is painted and I actually have it installed back onto the car. Okay, now that I've got it all primed with the UV and I cured it in the sunlight, all that's left now is to final sand it and get the outside wet sanded and ready for repair. So I'm going to start with a little bit of P500 grit on an orbital sander, and I'm going to clean off all the orange peel that's on the primer, and once that's cleaned off, I'll probably stop and then finish off the balance of the sanding with wet sandpaper and probably 800 grit. So I'll just get sanding. It's going to be a little noisy, but you can kind of see how it's done. So if you move in, you can see how it looks. Then you can see very quickly the orange peel is coming off of the... You can see how quickly the orange peel comes off of this. And this is only a few minutes of baking in the sun. There's a little bit of UV rays, and it made the primer very, very easy to sand. One of the things we want to make sure we do is get a nice feathered edge so that we don't see that edge once it's been refinished. Okay, so I'm going to grab a newer piece of 500 and just clean off that edge so that it feathers a little bit nicer. Okay, so if you can come and look here, you'll see that this edge is still a pretty abrupt edge, which means you'll be able to see that edge when we put paint over it. So I need to feather this edge right here out just a little bit more so that it won't be visible. I'll do that just with a nice fresh piece of 500 grit. Do it nice and slow. There we go. Okay, got a nice feathered edge there. I don't want to go too much down more. You can see how the edge is feathered back now. That'll allow for the edge to not show when we spray the panel. Okay, very good. That's probably good enough right there. There we go. Beautiful. Okay, a little bit more sanding right there. And I think we got it. So you can see it's all sanded down. I didn't sand through in any spots. We've got no paint edges showing, so that'll be nice. We'll just wet sand this over top of the P500 grit, and I'll be able to get it sealed, based, and clear coated. So I'll do a little bit more sanding and prep of the panel, but next time you see this, it should be as a finished spray painted panel, unless I can capture some of the video of it being painted. Okay, now that we've got the fender painted, I was unable to get any pictures of the fender while it was actually being painted. The process was done at another facility, and I was only able to get some video of it after it was all done. But the great news is that we were able to paint the fender. We kept the color back on this edge. We back taped along this edge right here, so that only color was applied up on this edge here. No color was applied up here. This has all just been re-cleared. So while I had the fender completely disassembled, once it was all re-cleared, I reattached the label. That's the information label for having the door closed when you close the hood. I reinstalled the two rubber mounts. There's two screws here on the top, one that was hidden underneath the foam right here. Then there's two screws down on the bottom that go into the little tabs, and one screw inside the door. There's also 3 or 4 fender liner screws that hold the fender liner up against the fender itself. Other than that, the fender went back on very well. And as you can see, our strategy worked out well. From a color match standpoint, we wound up with the color having zero difference between here. Now, these cars, because they were painted in pieces at the factory, some have some variance in colors. And this car is original paint, and it does have a little bit of variance in colors between the quarter panel and the door and the other fender on the other side. But this is what I wanted. I wanted it to look as original as possible. Now, the purpose for making this video was to show you that repairing these fenders, while it might be a little time consuming, is not difficult, and you can completely repair these in your garage at home with just some basic hand tools and some good products. 3M makes a good product, as well as Lord Fuser. I happen to choose Lord Fuser's 152 just because I had access to it. So there are options. Please don't think I'm picking one brand over another. They're both high quality products, and I would use either in repairing any component for myself. I'm very happy with how it turned out. Reinstalling it on the car basically was just reverse of the process of taking it off. And so here we are. Fender's back on, it's fixed, looks wonderful. I didn't have to buy a new fender, and you too can repair a plastic fender for one of these cars. And I want to make it clear, it's a sheet molded compound. It is not fiberglass. So the repair process is very different. If you try using fiberglass methods on this, you're quite likely to have some future adhesion problems with that fiberglass letting go of the sheet molded compound. Make sure you use the proper adhesives. So with that said, this is another episode of Tim's Garage. Please like, share, subscribe, and we'll see you in a future episode.